Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Thursday, May 18th, 2023. It is 9:09 a.m. The session is set to go until 10 a.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. Vice Chair Ty Menster joining us via Zoom. And to my left is Commissioner Gary Edwards. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ryan Travis, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell and Assistant County Manager Rob Gelder. We have a presentation here today for Thurston County Mobility Strategy Study Update. And
at this point, I will probably give the floor to the interim county engineer for now. Matt Alselman, I personally looking forward to hear the result of this study. This in cooperation with the Thurston Regional Planning Council has been in the work for at least a couple of years, if so. So you will hear today a little bit of that perspective and give us perhaps the window as to how we need to address those findings into the future. So Matt, let me see if I can share the screen.
Good morning, Matt Alselman, as County Manager said, interim county engineer. And joining me today is Samuel Bloom in our traffic engineering group, as well as Aiden Dixon and Karen Parkhurst from Thurston Regional Planning Council. I don't see Karen, but I know she's there. I know that you're very familiar with the work that TRPC does because you're currently on the board or have been on a county representative on the Thurston Regional Planning Council or the Transportation Policy Board. The county has a good relationship with TRPC and we partner on a lot of regional activities. One of the more important activities that we partner with TRPC on is some of the long-term, long-range planning efforts that the county does. And it's not just the county that works with TRPC. TRPC kind of looks at the region as a whole for what that long-term planning looks like and works with the county as well as other local cities and the state. Public Works reached out to TRPC and requested support for the rural mobility study, which Aiden will be providing a summary of shortly. As you know, many of the arterials in Thurston County are congested and projections show that traffic is only going to increase in the region and they're going to become more and more congested in the future. These arterials serve as the primary connections between the communities in Thurston County, but also as a primary connection for the goods and services, not just for the county, but for the state as well. So the results of this study will allow us to provide updates to our capital facilities plan, our comprehensive plan, our upcoming update to the road standards, our traffic impact fee program, and many other documents and ordinances. So at this point, I'm happy to turn it over to Aiden, and we look forward to it.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Aiden Dixon. I'm a planner at Thurston Regional Planning Council. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the Rural Mobility Strategy Update. It's a project that has been in the works for a few years. We're very close to the end. A lot of really interesting things have come out of it. So I'm just happy to be here and happy to speak transportation to you guys for a few minutes. The agenda's on this slide above. I'm just going to give a little intro and context to the project, tell you guys why it's important. Then we'll move on to what we've accomplished so far with the project. It's not quite finished yet, but it's at the very, very closing stages. So a lot of the work has already been done. Goals, performance measures, some current and future conditions, stuff like that. And then we're going to look forward to the next steps. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll talk to you a little bit more about what's to come. So as Matt said, many of the rural arterial roadways in Thurston County are congested today. Growth projections show that it's only going to get more congested as we move forward in the future. Thurston County is a very fast-growing county. Both urban and rural areas are experiencing a lot of population growth right now. We recently passed 300,000 folks in the county. Just going to keep going up from there. So Matt also said, you know, these roadways are primary connections between the North County and the South County areas, are pretty major arterials that connect places like Yelm, Tenino, Rainier to, you know, these urbanized areas up above, those commercial destinations in the urbanized area. There are also commuters that go to work, you know, regional destinations, and kind of conversely, we've got a lot of destinations in the South County area that people from the North County go down to go see. So there's a big flow that moves from north to south and from south to north. They're also function as these critical kind of emergency routes, so detour routes when Interstate 5 will shut down, such as the Amtrak derailment in 2019 or 2017.
17.
Critical roadways that we're looking at right now. However, there are limitations to addressing congestion through road widening. So we've got funding issues of just inability to pay for this kind of stuff. We've got environmental concerns with road widening, and also kind of right-of-way limitations that we've got. So there are constraints to just simply widening roads to accommodate more traffic. Like their urban counterparts, strategy corridors, strategies other than road widening are kind of needed to address these congestion issues that we're experiencing on these corridors. There's also safety issues, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, in addition to congestion too. So collisions, crashes, these kinds of things. You know, this project's goal is to make recommendations for implementation and to kind of come up with different strategies to address congestion and safety issues that are present on our roadways. So let's talk a little bit more about the project specifically. What are the parts? So there are 4 parts to the project. One, we've got goals and performance measures. The second is current conditions. So we took a pretty comprehensive look at how these roadways were functioning or not functioning, intersections, you know, from a variety of kind of perspectives. Future conditions, we've got, report provides a kind of a technical analysis of roadway conditions. It helps us identify a range of strategies to address issues that we found in the current conditions report. And then finally, implementation and monitoring. So the implementation and monitoring plan includes a prioritized project list with cost estimates, a strategy for monitoring the impact of projects on roadway function. So we make recommendations for projects to address congestion and safety. And then we have a monitoring plan in place or we will have a monitoring plan in place to kind of gauge the effectiveness of what we will do in the future. And also funding strategy. It's important to discuss how all this is going to get paid for. So making recommendations for kind of preliminary, ventures into how we're going to pay for it all. So let's just talk really briefly about what we've accomplished so far. Our goals and performance measures kind of set the stage for the project at the beginning, kind of lets us know like how we're going to move forward and what we're actually going to be looking at. As you can see on the slide above, we've got a variety of performance measures that we looked at, pretty comprehensive look at not just congestion, not just safety, but also things like emissions, cost, population and employment density. We've got an equity perspective, large vehicle mobility with freight and semis that use these roads, critical connections between a semi gets off at I-5, needs to go to Yelm or needs to go to Rainier, and how does it get there? And can these roads accommodate increased flows of trucks? So these types of issues are impacting our county's rural roadways, and they'll help us make recommendations for project prioritization. So let's move into current conditions, where kind of the meat and potatoes, what we kind of looked at to help us understand what's actually happening on these roadways. Sorry. So the project geography, it's really important to kind of come up with a definition or kind of to be explicit about what roadways we're looking at and which ones we're not. The project geography consists of approximately 310 miles of locally managed arterials and collectors, which are kind of illuminated there in blue. Also, they're unincorporated Thurston County. The project roadways are located outside city limits and outside the urban growth areas. So we are not looking at roadways inside jurisdiction boundaries, and we are not looking at roadways inside UGAs. We're also not looking at interstates or US highways or state roads. So these are only roads that are managed by Thurston County. US highways, obviously, they're managed by different agencies.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
You said not UGAs?
Yes, outside of UGAs. Mhm.
But we take care of roads?
We
and-
manage.
We manage the
within
roads
UGA.
within the UGAs.
Okay, well,
Okay, I just.
no, it's fine, yeah, no worries.
Well, perhaps what you're saying is you just look at the rural classified
Yeah,
roadways.
rural classified roads, that's more specific and more
Okay.
accurate there, yeah, apologies.
There's a
I
classification.
do that every
for
once in a
rural.
while, just to let Matt know I'm paying.
And in any case, the intersections that we're looking at, they actually fell outside of UGAs anyway, so we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the intersections that we're looking at, even when you include UGAs, they all fell outside of them, so kind of it works out for us. So in any case, about 310 miles of roadway that's outside jurisdiction boundaries, only rural classified roads in Thurston County. So let's start at the beginning. There are a lot of mileage of roads, there's a lot of intersections that we're looking at. How do we take that huge universe of intersections and roadways and distill it down to something that's actionable? We don't want to give the county a list of, hundreds of intersections and say, hey, this is what, go for it. So TRPC has a regional traffic model it used to understand how traffic volumes will likely grow between now and 2045. The model, it basically just simulates the movement of individual vehicles on travel lanes, and it's really good for identifying and kind of evaluating intersection function. So 71 intersections of concern were initially evaluated based on how significantly future traffic volumes were forecast to increase. So you've got all these intersections, and we basically came up with 71 initial intersections that were forecast to experience the most significant increase in traffic volumes. Fair and Peers, which is the consultant that worked for this project, conducted a congestion analysis on these 71 initial intersections to better understand how projections of population and employment growth would affect their operation into the future. So basically taking those 71 intersections and then digging into the data about projected population and employment growth. Obviously, they're going to be different depending on where they are. So we conducted a safety analysis at TRPC kind of in tandem with the congestion analysis that examined collision data that provided by the state DOT to better understand where collisions involving serious injuries or fatalities, I'm gonna be calling them KSI collisions. It basically just stands for killed or seriously injured. So there's a lot of crashes, but we're basically looking at the ones that are the most severe, that result in someone experiencing a fatality or someone being seriously injured. So where are those occurring on the roadways? So we basically got the congestion analysis and we've got the safety analysis, as you can see right there. The results of these two analyses allowed us to kind of distill the 71 initial intersections down to a prioritized list of 14. So basically eliminated a lot of the ones that weren't experiencing significant congestion issues or weren't experiencing a lot of safety issues. And then we arrived at basically a final list of 14 priority intersections. So let's talk about the congestion analysis first. It's pretty interesting. So for the congestion analysis, Fair and Peers, they took those 71 initial intersections and they grouped them up into 9 growth areas, which you can see on the slide right there. It basically allowed them to simplify growth rate assumptions, and it provides an understanding of how increased traffic and increased population and employment, all these things would affect multiple intersections in an area. So looking at intersections in kind of little small, 9 small little groups. This kind of traffic volume growth percentages were compared with population and employment growth rates and used to further refine the analysis. So we basically are taking projected population growth and projected employment growth rates on those 2 last columns, and then we've got the total growth volume in the second column right there. These generally align with each other, so basically the second column, the higher the percentages in the second column, the higher the percentages will be in the last two columns. I kind of want to call your attention to the arrows. As you can see, two specific kind of groups or kind of areas are experiencing triple digit or forecast to experience triple digit increases in population and employment, specifically the unincorporated area east of Lacey and also the unincorporated area southeast of Rainier and Yelm. These communities or these areas have grown very substantially over the past 2 decades, and they're anticipated to grow pretty significantly into the future as well. We've got 119% population, forecast population growth, specifically southeast of Rainier and Yelm. And that generally tracks with what we've been seeing as well, so. Just a brief discussion of the safety analysis results. So basically, TRPC analyzed collisions where someone was killed or seriously injured, again, a KSI collision, to identify kind of any geographic clustering that may be present. Didn't quite know before, but now we're looking at these things and we have a better idea of where these things may be clustering or where these incidents may be clustering. All collisions, all KSI collisions in Thurston County were filtered down. This is from 2010 to 2019 to only include those occurring on those project roadways. So
What does KSI stand for?
I'm sorry, KSI stands for killed or seriously injured. So it's basically just an abbreviation, just only the most severe crashes that we're looking at right now.
Does the data also include the root cause of the KSI?
It does cause the root, yeah. There's the crash data that we have has been collected by state DOT, is from police officers, and it's got a lot of subfields. The amount of analysis you can do with it is pretty extensive and varied, but it does include those things. In addition to time of day, vehicle, how many vehicles, causes, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of dig into the reasons behind this later in the presentation. It's pretty interesting stuff. So basically resulted in 5 general clusters, as you can see on this map right there. The clusters experiencing these KSI collisions, they generally overlap the most congested intersection areas from the congestion analysis. So that's good for us. It allows us to understand that we're on the right track with our analysis, where we're seeing higher incidence of these serious collisions and higher congestion rates. Kind of gives us a clue as to where we should kind of direct resources better. So if they were scattered and they didn't overlap very much, it'd be a little bit less straightforward. So it basically just gives us an idea that our analysis is on track and that we're looking at the right things and we're seeing these patterns and we can kind of address them more effectively. Yeah, those 5 clusters, generally speaking, one is in by Grand Mound area, and then we've got one in the southeast, and then we've got one kind of on Rainier Road in the center. We've got another one east of Lacey, and then the final one up there is up on the peninsulas in kind of like North Thurston County.
Can I jump in real
Yeah, go
fast?
for it.
So this, I hate to say this is predictable, but the data kind of just reaffirmed what we knew some of our problem corridors were. We know the Bald Hills corridor has an issue with KSI collisions. We've put significant investments in that corridor. We know that Rainier Road has had issues with KSIs. And then up north, the driver of that cluster is the Johnson Point, Hawks Prairie area. Unfortunately, we've had some pretty bad collisions in there. And then to the east, we've had some issues with Old Pacific Highway. And that's just because people drive so dang fast on that road. And unfortunately, when you're driving 60, 70 miles an hour and you leave the roadway, it's kind of like Bald Hills, it's gonna be a pretty serious collision.
Yeah.
Kind of following up on that, how do you categorize either stupid or intoxication in your criteria that you're putting together, so that maybe one area, that if it wasn't for stupid, maybe wouldn't even be a problem, or maybe if it wasn't for intoxication, would not be a problem. So are you gathering those kind of facts as well as just the serious incident?
Do you want to go first?
Go for it.
Okay, it's actually, It's a great question. There's a slide that's later in the presentation that kind of digs into those things a little bit more.
Just be patient. right?
No, it's great. It's a great question. I think it's one of the more interesting things that I'm a data nerd, so it is something that is able to be gathered, and drug and alcohol does factor into these collisions. It varies, but it is a factor. And also what you've discussed, you brought up is the state and nationally is more of like what they call systemic safety. It's basically kind of taking the human element out of it and designing roadways so that even if someone is acting stupid, the chances of them really hurting themselves or potentially dying is
See,
less.
I'm against that because it kind of gets away from Darwin. That's the problem. So, I mean, that's why I'm trying to figure out, because I'll prioritize my decisions, based on the information
Sure.
that we receive.
Mhm.
But I don't think we can't do much about stupid.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're just trying to make the roads more safe for more people.
Okay.
I don't wanna get ahead of myself. Well, maybe I'll leave the spoilers for but the reasons behind these collisions, they differ pretty significantly based on where you are in the county, but we'll talk about it.
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I see the county manager can't stand it.
Let me get, Commissioner Mensah, do you have any questions?
Not yet.
Great. I have some of the questions and I'm wondering, so the intersections of concerns and how they relate to the KSIs. Because we're seeing some intersections of concerns, but we're not seeing really KSIs on them. Do they go lower on the priority list then? Does that switch out?
That's a great question. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the presentation, but it's actually kind of one of the more interesting facts, tidbits that we pulled out was that most of the KSI collisions are not intersection related in the study. They actually occur on corridors in between the intersections. So you basically got congestion issues at intersections, and then you've got safety issues on corridors between intersections.
So we're very different, as a county, what counties will see is that most of your serious collisions are gonna occur on your corridors. Whereas if you go into a more urbanized area, like within the cities, your KSI collisions are gonna occur more likely at intersections. And that's just because on county roads, typically people are driving faster, and like you park the road when you're driving fast, then you hit an adjacent power pole or a tree. Unfortunately, it's not gonna be good.
We could make the speed limit 15 miles an hour and stupid wouldn't follow it anyway. It's true. And we'd still have those same fatalities. And probably the intoxication as well.
I resent that comment.
Most of the KSI collisions are fixed object collisions, so like exactly what Matt said, in the rural areas of the county. It's someone departing the roadway or the travel lane and colliding with or impacting a power pole or a barrier or a wall or a tree or something like that. Whereas in the urban area, most of these KSI collisions are gonna be car on car, so someone hitting each other like that. So,
And
interesting distinction.
maybe going back to the empirical approach to determine, what we're discussing today. And I think it's two fundamental issues when we're talking about congestion and safety. And the remedies for each one of them are fundamentally different. So when you begin the conversation stating that TRPC used the model to determine the congestion at the intersections. I think it would be great to understand what the level of service that you use as a baseline to determine what intersections have gone up beyond the capacity, because that will tell us what is it the improvements that we need to do in a particular intersection. But it seems to be we blended the whole conversation into safety as well. And it's fundamentally different. And I agree that probably some of the safety concerns in the rural areas is on the segments, because we have narrow lanes, lack of shoulders. So as a result, we don't have a recovery area for somebody who veers off the roadway. That's a totally different strategy that we need to do when we're dealing with the nodes and the intersections. And I think it will be great to understand, at least from my point of view, what was the level of service that we utilized when we determined a particular intersection was congested. You went through a great analysis of population growth, employment growth, all that contributes to a long-term growth in traffic volumes. And we have for instance, a concurrency model. They really gets to the point of level of service. If we have determined for a 2-lane roadway, that's the tolerance of maximum traffic volumes that we have to determine a particular intersection, right? And sometimes on the urban areas and the UGAs, when we resolve the congestion, the intersections by default, the segment is resolved.
Correct.
So I think it will be great, at least for me to understand, what was the baseline to determine the congestion analysis at the intersections? Because you just breezed through that.
Sure.
And you know, going into the model, the empirical approach and the model, the TRP, I've seen the model. But what is behind the model, I think it would be good for the board to understand the level of service.
That's a great point. Level of
You're
service.
gonna tell me
was-
later in the
It
presentation?
was, so, pretty extensive discussion with the consultants about level of service as it pertains to these intersections. And level of service was used as a kind of a cornerstone to evaluate and prioritize the intersections that ultimately we arrived at. So that's a really great point that you made. I did breeze over a little bit. I didn't want to get too into the weeds about LOS, A, B, C, D, F, but it was used pretty extensively to inform our decision-making process in the project. So, yeah.
I suppose most of this is already covered with a snow route. You know, as far as where we're gonna plow.
Oh, yes, it's focused on our arterials and collectors.
Yeah, I
exactly.
mean, mostly, so,
Okay,
okay.
I'll let them go forward.
Yeah, we can go forward. You can just scroll down and. So, you know, that being said, we basically, we arrived at 14 priority intersections, which are the blue pins on the map, and these 3 priority corridors, which are the orange lines. They will be enumerated, or they will be specifically called out later in the presentation, but just to give you a general overview of where they kind of are occurring, generally speaking. We've got clusters by Grand Mound over on the left, and we've got Bald Hills Road on the right, and then you know, a few scattered on Rainier, and then up north in the northern part of the county as well. Generally speaking, this is generally where we're looking at, kind of what we arrived at.
But this confirms exactly what the county manager just said, is that the root cause of congestion in the county is not the corridors, it's the intersections. So if you improve the level of service of the intersections, often you're addressing the corridors as well.
Yeah, where the LOS fails is at these intersections for sure. Just scroll down. So talking about future conditions now, moving away from current conditions, we're going to talk a little bit more about the performance measures and, you know, kind of that technical analysis of what things might look like into the future. So here's ranked intersections by performance measures. We've got our 14 intersections. We went through and evaluated them against our performance measures that were discussed earlier in the presentation. The ranking results can be seen in this chart. Each intersection was scored individually, separately, based on its level of service score. Its large vehicle compatibility, its collision history, overall traffic volume, presence of socioeconomically disadvantaged populations living nearby, so an equity perspective, and also overall population and employment density as well. So these ranked results will allow us to provide better, more accurate recommendations for project prioritization based on community need. Like Matt said earlier, they can be used to inform updates to the county's capital facilities plan, the comprehensive plan, street standards, traffic impact fee program, and the concurrency ordinance as well.
How you determine the tolerance of assigning points?
What was that question?
Which one?
How you assign the tolerance and assigning the points?
Oh, and the points? It was pretty detailed. I worked with our modelers to kind of give the scores. Basically, they're all separate, so we didn't weight them at all. So we didn't want to give different weights to different ones of these. So they're basically equally weighted, and each intersection was kind of looked at separately and also kind of in a group based on how significantly. So for instance, the LOS score, if a intersection was at a, say a B or an A, and then in 2045 it was forecast to be an F, that's a pretty serious movement, and that would be a 2.
That's the maximum.
Yeah, so basically that's the maximum frame.
0 to 2.
So basically we scored them from 0 to 2. basically from 0 to 2, and it was about half-point rankings, so basically 1.51, 1.5, or 2. A safety concern, it basically either was a safety concern or it wasn't a safety concern based on our safety analysis that we did. And then we went down the line and looked at emissions, equity, and then population and employment density as well.
So is the inverse thought process, meaning the higher score, the worse the intersection is?
Yes, that is correct. The more significant impact it would have, say like with emissions, basically the higher traffic volume that's moving through an intersection, the more emissions it's going to generate, so it would score higher.
In the equity points, how you determine those?
Equity was a challenge for this project. A lot of these intersections and corridors do not have many people living nearby them. However, we did look at census data and income data that we looked at people living underneath the poverty line in kind of I think it was like a mile or 2 radius around the intersection itself, and basically however many people that were experiencing or under the poverty line or had a certain kind of income bracket were grouped in, and based on what that was or how that looked and shaked out for each intersection, we assigned points based on that.
Commissioner
On the emissions,
Mhm.
what was that?
I was on that roll.
On the emissions issue, as you try to figure that out, granted that, but now we're all gonna be driving electric cars tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
So why does that even come into play anymore?
That's a great question. Electric vehicles are definitely on the horizon. Washington is actually one of the leaders in the country when it comes to electric vehicle adoption. However, most cars are ICE, internal combustion engines, and we're forecast to, as much as we want to phase them out, it's still 2045 is going to look a lot different than today, but there will still be ICE vehicles on the road. And when we were looking at emissions now, most vehicles on the roadway that when we scored this are ICE vehicles.
So you're just using reality in the future versus what the governor says we're all gonna be driving. in
Yeah, I
25
mean,
years.
it's a good question. Adoption rates are, this could be its own separate conversation. Actually, TRPC is looking at EV adoption, and so it's actually a separate project that we're looking at, so very interesting. But EV adoption rates are what they are. However, we're thinking to ourselves that, the majority of vehicles on the roadway right now are ICE vehicles, and that'll continue to be the case in the future. However, EVs will be adopted more and more, but by 2045, who really knows? Based on current adoption rates, it could be pretty significantly different. But the focus right now, at least, is for, as far as emissions go, is for also with trucks as well. We can't really know for certain what the proportion is going to be in 2045. So we decided to be a little conservative with our decision making when it comes to that.
How about your population and employment density? I mean, what's the difference between Old Pacific and Reservation, for an example, and Fir Tree and
Yeah.
Or Slater Canyon 26?
That's another great question. Yeah, so a lot of these intersections, like I said, they don't have many people living by them, and some of these intersections don't have any commercial establishments that are very close by. Some, however, do. When it comes to small businesses like gas stations or quarries or freight depots or different kinds of businesses that are located around the area.
Gravel pit down in the.
Gravel pit, yeah,
I knew exactly where you're
Yeah.
going with that.
So some of them are clustered pretty, I wouldn't say there's a lot of business activity, but some of them have more than others. Some have,
Heavy traffic
None.
versus light traffic.
yeah, exactly.
I understand the intent of assigning points to equity. High level, I think probably makes sense. What I'm struggling is to connect what you just described, how you assess the points for equity, the result and impact on congestion and safety. Help me understand how the assignment of points of equity, and again, I understand the intent, but help me draw the straight line as to why the low income analysis has contributed to congestion or safety related matters in this study. I just don't see it.
Yeah, no, it was a challenge for us too.
a block on a federal form?
Yeah,
Probably.
I don't know.
It was a challenge for us too. I will say some projects are more straightforward when it comes to equity perspectives and how they slot in. This one project is more technical, I would say, more focused on roadways. So equity was certainly a challenge to kind of find a way to incorporate. However, you know, these types of road widening and the associated pollution that might come from increased traffic volumes or increased traffic volumes that we're seeing right now could have a disproportionate effect on people that are lower income, depending on where they live. Again, it was a challenge to kind of figure out how that was, especially when you're looking at rural areas that don't really have as many people living nearby these intersections. So it was a challenge to kind of connect the dots there, but we feel that equity is an important perspective to consider in all projects. That being said, it was, I wouldn't say a primary driver of this. This was fairly kind of constrained to public works and roadways, but we felt it was necessary to include as a matter of course. And you know, the results weren't as revealing as some other projects that perhaps in the more urbanized areas with more people living in closer areas with density. But we felt like it was necessary to include.
Kind of being politically correct.
Well, that's what, you
Yeah.
felt it was necessary to include. I don't disagree with the point, but as anything that we go and do in the county, I think what we need to be very careful, not just checking the box. Checking the box on everything that we need to do. And things have to be meaningful and intentional on everything that we do. And it appears that this, it felt good to include it, but it still, we have not been able to connect the dots as to what this equity issue has been a direct connection to the results of congestion and safety of this study. No answer, I'm just making a comment.
No, it's a great point. Before I moved here, I was in Chicago, and there was a lot of equity work, and it's a lot more straightforward and obvious in Chicago and more urban areas. Out here, I think that organizations such as TRPC and the county and jurisdictions are still struggling to figure out how equity fits into what it looks like and how it fits into projects that we're trying to figure out. So it's definitely a work in progress. I think that the more we try, the better we get. So it's not necessarily have to be perfect about it, but I think it's important to have that conversation. And even if it doesn't slot in as obviously in some projects as others, it's still something you don't want to miss. So
I have to say from my stand, I'm not politically correct, and equity doesn't even figure into it for me. I'm not saying all the things that you've said aren't correct. It's just that why should we water down the importance of equity by trying to squeeze it into something that it has no effect on? That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Good point.
I just give me the facts, just the facts. We'll make a decision on the facts. And let's not try and invent facts to make it work, because in some other area, because if we water it down here, it's not as important over here. So
well said.
that's.
Yeah.
Let me get Commissioner Menzer and then let's go ahead and
Used up all our time.
Commissioner Menzer, do you have any questions, comments, sir?
I'm gonna make a comment, which is that I don't know what to ask because I don't know where we're going. I don't know what this is all leading to. So it's hard for me to know along the way what question I should be asking. The county manager even muddied the waters a little bit by saying that the safety and the safety remedies and the congestion remedies are different. So amalgamating them into this chart, I'm confused as to why we'd be doing that. So I'm just gonna wait until we get to the end because I really don't know where we're going.
Sorry about that, Commissioner.
You can move to the next slide. So I want to talk just a little bit more about what the things that have been brought up previously about safety on the corridors. Excuse me. Although most all congestion occurs at intersections, like we said, we found that substantial majority of these serious collisions, these KSI collisions, occurred on roadway corridors. They did not involve intersections. The top three corridors prioritized from a safety perspective are shown here. We've got Bald Hill Road, Rainier Road Southeast, and also Johnson Point Road Northeast. It's not the entirety of those roadways. It's certain corridor segments in between intersections, and the length of the roadways are also shown on the chart right there. Fixed object collisions account for the majority of these. As you can see, about 50% of all KSI collisions on project roadways were fixed objects. Drug and alcohol is a factor in almost 30% of these collisions. And if drug or alcohol was involved in these collisions, it's 2.5 times more likely to result in a KSI collision. So the moment you add drugs or alcohol into the mix when you're driving and this happens, you're 250% likely more to be involved in a collision where it's serious injury or death. So the results of this analysis will allow us to kind of direct resources to these corridors with treatments like increased signage or lighting or rumble strips or these kinds of treatments that we can use to,
Shouldn't have said that.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, it'll allow us to explore different options for remedying these issues present on corridors. We don't really know maybe what those are, but it's important to kind of, conduct these analyses to figure out which corridors are experiencing the most significant issues. And like Commissioner Menzer said, the treatments and the kind of strategies for intersections and corridors are gonna be different. And I think it was an important distinction that this analysis or this project was able to reveal for us, was that we can't treat all these the same and that we need to be kind of different strategies for addressing congestion, addressing safety. They're potentially different, and we need to look at these intersections and corridors kind of maybe as parts of a process or parts of a network, but also recognizing that we need to be a little bit more intentional, or we need to be intentional about the kinds of treatments that we are going to be exploring. So the consultant has provided us with treatment options for these intersections. They range. I didn't want to get into them too seriously in the presentation. I want to keep it more high level, but that being said, I just wanted to make it clear that when looking at roadway segments and then looking at intersections, it's important to recognize that this project was very revealing in that it allowed us to understand that these two causes or these two things were kind of functioning a little separately, and we need to be more specific or be specific when it comes to that. So let's at the very end here, we'll talk about next steps and looking forward. So we're almost finished with this project. It's about to be finished. The last steps are including drafting an implementation and monitoring plan, which is currently happening right now. It's going to include a prioritized project list provided to us by the consultant, cost estimates, strategy for monitoring the impact of projects on roadway function. So like I said earlier, you make recommendations for projects, these projects, shovels in the ground. How do we monitor the before and after? So what's happening before, what's happening after? We got a pretty good sense of the before. So if and when projects get completed, we're gonna come up with a strategy to kind of monitor the effectiveness of those projects. And also a funding strategy. This is all well and good, but if you don't have the money for it, then that's a pretty significant gap. So the implementation and monitoring plan will also include a dedicated funding strategy, potential options to explore grants and different kinds of funding streams to get these projects completed. We're also in the process of creating a public website with some project information, drafting communications to community members living nearby these intersections to inform them of potential work that may occur in the future. Potential funding strategies, they include a variety of grant opportunities based on roadway safety and safe systems and things like that. So that's all to come, should be complete very soon. And we'll keep you informed once it's complete.
So is this the end?
That is all, yeah.
Stop sharing so I can see the screen, and Commissioner Edwards, go ahead.
Everything was good stuff. I mean, this whole presentation, interesting stuff. But to me, you're missing the boat if you don't, you've got DUI or drug affected. But what about really trying to recognize, and it would be pretty easy to do. I'm not saying easy, it's easy for the guy who says it's easy. But figuring out how stupid does play in, that would be pretty easy to ask the investigating officer on these. issues, okay? What's your idea on what's going on? These guys know kind of what's up. And also texting. We could look at their phone, get a phone record, whatever it is, see if it matches the time of the accident. And give us a little better idea of real facts that we might be able to have an effect on. It's kind of like Project Zero from the Traffic Commission.
Right.
Is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, trying to claim you're gonna go to zero. It ain't happening. Let's be realists as we're doing business. And bureaucrats never want to be realists. They have some pie in the sky thing out here that's unattainable. I don't know if it's there to spend money or why it's even projected that way, because it's just not unattainable unless we all start walking, or riding a bicycle. So is there any way that you could include at least the texting aspect of it and a comment from the officer that goes in a different category that, hey, speed was involved here, racing was involved here, whatever it was, so that we can make a better analysis of really what the problem is, rather than kind of just taking a guess at it.
Sure.
And I mean, it's all good work. Don't get me wrong. I think it was good information that we got here.
Just to follow up on that, we can actually do that because the officers do code the police reports with whether it's driver inattention or they failed to
Yeah,
yield
but
right
we
away.
need to include that in
Yeah,
our
that's
information.
I guess what I'm saying is we can follow up and actually do that, so.
And your texting thing is available. I know on serious accidents, they go back once in a while
Yeah.
and do a subpoena if that's what it takes.
Sure. Yeah, the data that the officers collect is generally very comprehensive. Like I said previously, there's a lot of subfields on a lot of different ways you could structure an analysis, so that's all very accomplishable and doable. Yeah.
When I came to work this morning, just as a point of interest, I went by a
Were you
bunch of bus
texting?
stops. No, I was not texting. But every kid at a bus stop, everyone, I didn't see anybody that wasn't standing there like this. I mean, they wouldn't have noticed a car that was just about to run over them, no matter what. But I'm just saying, everybody kind of fits in that category now. Hopefully not every driver, but it's just reality. So let's include reality
Sure.
in our fact finding.
Commissioner Mensah?
Okay, so getting to the endpoint that I was looking for. So what this is about is trying to tweak our transportation improvement plan so that we're putting the right projects in the right order of priority based on safety and congestion. Matt, I think this question's for Matt. Is that what we're trying to do here? And then my second question is, there was references to a consultant, and is that being paid out of our road fund, or who is that consultant and how are they being funded?
I'll take it. So you're absolutely right. The results from this project are gonna be used to update our transportation improvement plan, our 6-year plan. But then also, by doing all this level of service analysis, we can make sure that our current concurrency policy also is set at an appropriate level so that we have a achievable project list, right? And to keep us out of trouble with the Growth Management Act. Following up on the funding, this is not coming from the county road fund. This is federally funded grant.
Thank you.
And
I
does this,
I just saw Karen pop up, so I didn't know if she wanted to, no, okay.
one question then, that's good. And let's see, goals to update. Shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Adjust the level of service. I lost my train of thought, so I guess I'm done. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I saw Karen, so I didn't know if she wanted to add anything.
No, I would like to add something about equity as we roll this out a little bit. And I'm just lurking. This is Aiden's first presentation with you. And, I didn't know what Commissioner Edwards was going to throw at him. And so, I thought I should be here just to make sure that he was okay. So I just wanted to say that I think we are all struggling with equity, that we have always considered it in some ways, but we are being asked to consider it in different ways. And so we're all going to be learning together And right now we're looking at demographics, how many of the population within the area of a project is impacted. But we also need to pull in the not only what's happening on the street now in safety and the like for people who may have not been part of our planning process, but we also have to look at the impacts of things like emissions. So if these intersections are not functioning well, and therefore there's a lot of idling, that means more emissions are coming out into the air. So if we were to put a roundabout here, for example, I'm not saying that's the answer, then that does keep the traffic moving a little better, and so people in the area would be less exposed to those emissions. We also know that about 25% of the population, this quote is from Disability Rights Washington, does not drive for whatever reason. So are they more likely, those percent of the population, to be walking through these intersections, to be riding a bike, to be taking a bus in the ones that have bus service, and therefore they're more vulnerable? So I think we'll be working with you, Mr. City County Exec, as well as others, to say, what does this mean? How can we make this relevant? We all want to go beyond checking the box, and we want to have true consideration. And when we do the outreach, we're trying to reach out to people that have not necessarily participated in our processes. So please help us all as we figure out how this works. As everyone said, it's become a new emphasis at the state level, at the federal level. We certainly know, even in our area, for example, the impacts of past road decisions, such as I-5 going through the middle of Tumwater and what that did when that was put in. Okay, I'm a Tumwater girl. So I was born and raised there. And so there are impacts. And so please help us figure this out. We're trying to make it relevant and real.
You know, I want to point out, first of all, I don't
Commissioner
think
Massey, you were on
they
mute.
did a super job.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I have a hard stop and I'll have to excuse myself. Thanks for the presentation, guys.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you.
One last question.
Okay, one last question.
So on the next steps, you're saying drafting implementation and monitoring plan, they will lead to assembling cost estimates. So I would assume that you will go to the level of analysis to determine what type of improvements will be needed. Because depending on the congestion of a certain intersection, you know, a roundabout may work, a left turn lane may work, and a signal may work. Are you going to the level of detail to determine the cost estimates?
Yes.
Let me just say one thing. Can I say one thing?
Okay.
Real quick. Because your report is not done yet, could you take the time to look, if you can get the information, so you can address text and stupid?
Yeah, that's
Because
definitely
I
something we can
think
do.
it'll make it a lot more valid.
What are you saying is distracted drivers and influenced drivers?
Yeah, I just don't use the right terminology. I use terminology that Joe Blow can understand, that's all. I'm not a bureaucrat.
That's definitely something we can explore.
Okay, thank you. Very good presentation.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Two quick points. Matt, getting back to, you mentioned the tip and the concurrency policy, but would this also inform the CFP for the longer horizon, right? Because
Absolutely.
we're talking about this, okay. And then the other piece was just for my sake, on those intersections, there was one that was listed as Old Highway 9 Southwest in James Road, and I'm assuming it's 99?
It's
No.
actually Old Highway 9.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
it's
there
Old
is a
Highway
9 and a 99,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to,
Right there next to Maple Lane.
okay.
You have to spend a lot of time to get them all figured out.
A lot of time poring over maps and looking at these roadways.
Well, I just want to make sure it wasn't a.
Commissioner Edwards can describe to you that particular segment.
Okay, it is 10:03. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Very good.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
We are adjourned.